I didn't come to the mountains looking for love. I came looking for an ending. The end of a lease, the end of a project that had hollowed me out, the end of the city's ceaseless grinding noise. I came for the silence of pine trees and the honest ache of physical labor. I came because my friend Mark, in a moment of casual kindness, had offered a solution that sounded like a half-forgotten dream. His father was renovating an old cabin. He needed a hand. I needed to disappear. It was a perfect, temporary intersection of needs. Cole. I knew him only as Mark's dad, a name attached to a tall, quiet presence at college graduations and one awkward holiday dinner years ago. He was a man carved from granite and patience, with a voice that was low and rough, like stones tumbling in a riverbed. He existed in my mind as a fixed point of distant, masculine authority, solid, unmovable, and, for reasons I never dared to examine, deeply unsettling to my carefully ordered world. He was a widower, a carpenter, a father, a man rooted in a reality I only ever observed from behind glass. The distance between us wasn't just age or the fact that he was the father of my friend. It was a chasm of experience, of worlds that did not and should not overlap. He was a straight line, and I was a question mark I had long ago learned to hide. The attraction I felt was a secret I kept even from myself, a low hum of impossible longing buried beneath layers of practicality and fear. It was a harmless fiction, a safe one, because nothing could ever come of it. Then my landlord sold the building. My project deadline passed, leaving me feeling scoured and empty. The city, once a vibrant landscape of opportunity, suddenly felt like a cage of concrete and exhaust fumes. I mentioned it offhandedly to Mark over the phone, a casual complaint about the universe's poor timing. "You should come up here," he'd said, his voice crackling with bad reception. "Dad's been trying to get that old cabin on Heron Lake into shape. He could use the help. You get free air and a place to stay. He gets a cheap laborer. Win-win." The idea was absurd. Me? Doing manual labor? I was a graphic designer. My hands were familiar with the smooth, cool surface of a tablet, not the rough bite of splintered wood. But the image it conjured of cool mornings, the scent of sawdust, a quiet place to lick my wounds, was a powerful lure. It was a disruption, a break in the suffocating routine of my life. "I don't know." I'd hesitated. "I'd just be in the way." "Nah, we'll put you to work. Sanding, painting, hauling stuff. It's mindless work. Good for the soul." A pause. "I'll ask him for you." And to my profound shock, Cole had said yes. A simple, gruff "sure, if he's not afraid of work," relayed through Mark. And just like that, I was packing a duffel bag, trading my sleek laptop for worn jeans and old sneakers, driving toward the man who was little more than a silhouette in my memory. Driving towards the mountains, towards the silence, towards him. The cabin was more rustic than I'd imagined. It smelled of damp earth, wood smoke, and time. It stood nestled in a grove of hemlocks, overlooking a lake that was the color of steel under the overcast sky. It was beautiful and stark and a little bit lonely. Cole was on the porch when I pulled up. He looked bigger than I remembered, broader in the shoulders, his forearms corded with muscle under the rolled-up sleeves of a flannel shirt. He didn't smile, just nodded his eyes, a startlingly clear, pale blue, taking in my city car and my doubtlessly inadequate clothes. "Leo," he said. It wasn't a question. His voice was exactly as I remembered. Low, steady. "Cole, thanks again for this. I really appreciate it." My own voice sounded thin, reedy. "Mark said you needed to get out of the city." He gestured with his chin toward the cabin. "Your room's in the back. Small, but it's dry. Put your things away. We'll start tomorrow. Sunrise." And that was it. No small talk. No tour. Just a statement of facts. I felt like an employee. A temporary, slightly disappointing employee. It was exactly the distance I had expected. It was safe. Still, a strange tremor went through me as I walked past him, the sheer physical presence of him a palpable force field. I was acutely aware of the space between us, a gap of only a few feet that felt like a mile-wide canyon. My room was a small, pine-paneled box with a single cot, a window looking into the dense woods, and one bare bulb hanging from the ceiling. It was perfect, an anonymous, monastic cell where I could simply be. I unpacked my bag, the silence of the forest pressing in, a stark contrast to the sirens and shouts of my apartment. Out the window, I could see Cole walking down to the dock, his stride long and sure. He stood there for a long time, just looking out at the water, a solitary figure against the vast, indifferent landscape. And for the first time, I saw not just Mark's dad, but a man alone. The thought was a small, sharp splinter under the skin. The first few days established a rhythm. We worked. We didn't talk much. The work was hard, honest, and exhausting. My body, accustomed to the gentle ergonomics of an office chair, screamed in protest. Every muscle ached. My hands, soft and useless, were quickly decorated with blisters and small cuts. Cole was a patient, if taciturn, teacher. He showed me how to measure twice and cut once, how to hold a hammer properly, how to use the weight of my body to my advantage. He moved with an economy of motion that was mesmerizing to watch. There was no wasted energy, no hesitation, just a deep, ingrained knowledge of his materials and his tools. I became an observer. While I sanded old floorboards, my mind blessedly numb from the repetitive motion, my eyes were free to roam. I studied him. I learned the map of him, the fine web of lines around his eyes, deeper when he was concentrating, a faint, silvery scar that cut through his left eyebrow. The way his dark hair, threaded with gray at the temples, curled slightly at his nape when it was damp with sweat. I noticed the weariness that settled on him at the end of the day, a slight slump in his otherwise ramrod-straight posture. I saw the frustration flicker in his jaw when a board wouldn't fit right, a brief, tight clenching of muscle. And I saw moments of unexpected grace. Once, a small bird flew into the cabin and panicked, beating its wings against the new glass of the window pane. I froze, unsure what to do. Cole simply put down his saw, walked over, and cupped the frantic creature in his large, calloused hands. He held it for a moment, murmuring something too low for me to hear, then carried it to the open door and released it. The bird shot away into the trees, unharmed. He turned back to his work without a word, as if nothing had happened. But I had seen it. The gentleness in those strong hands. The quiet kindness. And it was like finding a secret door in a wall I had thought was solid rock. The silhouette in my mind was beginning to fill with color, with texture, with confounding detail. The safe distance I had counted on was shrinking with every shared silence, with every small, observed vulnerability. My heart, which I had brought here to quiet, was starting to beat with a new, and much more dangerous, rhythm. It happened on the 5th day, a day of oppressive humidity, the air thick and heavy, promising a storm. We were fitting a large panel of drywall onto a ceiling, an awkward, clumsy ballet of two bodies trying to work as one. I was on a stepladder, holding my side up, my arms trembling with fatigue. Cole was on another ladder beside me, his shoulder just inches from mine. "Okay, ready?" he grunted, positioning his end. "On 3. 1, 2. He shifted his weight, and his knee bumped against mine. It was nothing, a fleeting, accidental contact, but a jolt, sharp and electric, shot up my leg. My breath hitched. 3. Lift. I pushed, my muscles screaming, my mind utterly blank except for the lingering ghost of that touch. The panel slid into place. "Hold it steady," he commanded, his voice close to my ear. I could feel the warmth of his breath on my neck. My skin prickled. "Don't react. Don't be weird. It was an accident." He reached for the screw gun that was clipped to his belt. At the exact same moment, my exhausted arm gave a little, and my hand slipped down the edge of the drywall to brace myself. Our hands collided. Not a brush. A solid, firm impact. His fingers tangled with mine, his palm pressing against the back of my hand. Time stopped. For a full second, we were frozen, our hands locked together against the stark white of the drywall. I could feel the rough texture of his calluses against my skin, the surprising heat of him. It was like grabbing a live wire. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic, trapped bird. I could feel the pulse in his wrist, or maybe it was my own, thrumming through the point of contact. My first instinct was to yank my hand away as if I'd been burned, to apologize, to make a joke, but I couldn't move. My gaze was fixed on our joined hands. His were so much larger, darker from the sun, sculpted by years of hard work. Mine looked pale and delicate in comparison. He was the one who moved first. He didn't pull away. He slowly, deliberately untangled his fingers from mine. The movement was measured, almost gentle. His eyes met mine for a fraction of a second, and in them I saw not annoyance, not anger, but a flicker of something else. Surprise? Confusion? It was gone before I could name it. Sorry, he muttered, his voice rougher than usual. He grabbed the screw gun and turned away, the spell broken. No, my fault. I managed to say, my voice a strained whisper. I pulled my hand back, cradling it against my chest. My skin tingled where he had touched it. My mind was a roaring chaos. It wasn't nothing. That wasn't an accident. Not the way he had held on for that extra second. Not the way he had looked at me. Or was I imagining it? Was I projecting my own stupid, hopeless desire onto an innocent gesture? The air in the room was suddenly thick, charged with a new and terrifying energy. The safe, easy silence we had built was shattered. Now, the silence was a physical weight, filled with unspoken questions. He worked with a furious, focused energy, driving screws into the panel with sharp, percussive bursts. He didn't look at me again for the rest of the afternoon, and I was left on my ladder, my body trembling, my heart aching with a feeling that was equal parts terror and hope. The storm had been promised, and now I felt it was about to break, not just in the sky, but inside the four walls of that small, isolated cabin. The sky finally broke that evening. The promised humidity curdled into a bruised, purple twilight, and then the heavens opened. It wasn't just rain. It was a biblical deluge, sheets of water driven sideways by a howling wind. A flash of lightning bleached the world white, followed an instant later by a crack of thunder, so loud it shook the cabin to its foundations. And then darkness. The single work light we had plugged in went out. The hum of the small refrigerator in the corner died. We were plunged into an absolute, disorienting blackness. Damn it, Cole's voice came out of the dark, closer than I expected. There was a new edge to it, a tension that hadn't been there before. Power's out, I stated, the epitome of brilliant observation. My heart was still skittering from the thunderclap, but the darkness itself didn't bother me. City life had its own training for this. Power outages were a regular feature. I heard a scraping sound, the legs of a chair on the wooden floor. Another flash of lightning illuminated him for a split second. He was standing in the middle of the room, his hands clenched into fists at his sides. His face was a mask of taut control, but his eyes were wide, fixed on the window as if staring down an enemy. In that brief, stark moment, he didn't look like the capable, unshakable man I knew. He looked afraid. "It's just the storm," I said, my voice softer than I intended. "I have a flashlight in my bag. And my phone. Fuses are probably blown," he said, his voice tight. "Breaker box is outside." In the shed, he didn't move. The wind howled, rattling the window frames. Another clap of thunder, this one more of a low, continuous rumble, rolled across the lake. I saw his shoulders tense. Something clicked in my head. The storm. He wasn't afraid of the dark. He was afraid of the storm. This solid mountain of a man was unnerved by thunder and lightning. The thought was so unexpected, so humanizing, that it knocked the breath out of me. The carefully constructed hierarchy, him the capable master, me the clumsy apprentice, crumbled into dust. Right now, in this specific situation, I was the one who was calm. "Okay," I said, my voice taking on a confidence I didn't know I possessed. "Stay here. I'll get the lights." I felt my way through the darkness to my room, my hands tracing the cool, rough-planked walls. I grabbed the small, powerful flashlight from my bag and a battery-powered lantern I brought for emergencies. Clicking on a flashlight, I cut a clean, white path through the oppressive black. When I returned to the main room, Cole was right where I'd left him, a statue in the center of the floor. I didn't shine the light directly at him. instead aiming it at the ceiling to diffuse it. I set the lantern on the table and switched it on. It cast a warm, steady glow, pushing the deepest shadows back into the corners. The space immediately felt safer, cozier, a small haven against the raging storm outside. He finally looked at me, his expression unreadable in the flickering light. The tension in his shoulders had eased slightly. "The breaker box can wait until it lets up," I said, matter-of-factly. No sense in going out in that. He just nodded, his throat working. He seemed a loss for words. For the first time since I'd arrived, I felt like I had the upper hand. Not in a power play sort of way, but as if the ground beneath us had suddenly, seismically leveled. I wasn't just the clumsy city kid. I was useful. I was calm. And he, the stoic patriarch, was vulnerable. "You're not bothered by this?" he asked, his voice low. "I've lived through a few citywide blackouts. And Hurricane Sandy," I said with a small shrug. "You get used to the noise. You learn to have a backup plan." He gave a short, rough laugh that sounded rusty from disuse. "A backup plan, right?" He finally moved, sinking into one of the wooden chairs at the table. He ran a hand over his face, looking tired, deeply tired. I hesitated, then pulled out the other chair and sat across from him. The lantern light threw our shadows, huge and dancing, against the walls. The only sounds were the roar of the rain on the roof and the frantic drumming of my own heart. The air was thick with everything that had happened that day. The accidental touch, the charged silence, and now this. This strange, intimate reversal of roles. We sat in silence for a long time. It was a different kind of silence than before. Not awkward, not heavy with unspoken tension, but watchful, waiting. "I hate storms," he said finally, his voice barely a whisper. He was staring into the lantern flame as if it held some profound secret. "Ever since," he trailed off, shaking his head. "Ever since your wife." The words were out of my mouth before I could stop them. They hung in the air between us, impossibly bold. His head snapped up, his pale eyes locking onto mine. I expected anger, a sharp rebuke for my presumption. Instead, I saw a flicker of raw, unguarded pain. He didn't answer right away. He just held my gaze, and in that moment, I felt like he was seeing me for the very first time. Not Mark's friend, not his temporary helper, just me. "She loved them," he said, his voice thick with memory. "She'd stand on the porch and watch the lightning. Said it made her feel alive." He swallowed hard. "She was driving home from her sister's place. A storm came up out of nowhere. A tree came down. The simple, brutal facts landed in the small space between us like stones. My breath caught in my throat. Cole, I'm so sorry. I didn't know. How could you?" He looked away, back at the flame. It was a long time ago, but the grief in his voice was as fresh as if it were yesterday. Now, when it thunders, all I can hear is that phone call. My chest ached with a sudden, overwhelming wave of empathy. All the intimidation I'd ever felt towards him evaporated, replaced by a fierce, protective urge. The man I'd built up in my head as an unbreachable fortress of strength was just as broken and lonely as I was. Maybe more so. "My loneliness is a choice," I heard myself say, the confession spilling out into the warm, flickering light. Or I tell myself it is. It's easier than trying and failing. I thought of the string of failed dates, the feeling of always being on the outside looking in, the quiet resignation that had become my closest companion. "It's just quiet." He looked at me again, a deep, searching look. "You're not as quiet as you seem, Leo." My heart stuttered. He saw me. He actually saw me. The observant, watchful person hiding behind a facade of shy compliance. "Neither are you," I whispered. A small, sad smile touched his lips. "No, I guess not." The rain drummed on. The lantern flickered. The space between us felt impossibly small, charged with the weight of our shared confessions. He hadn't moved, but I felt as if he were leaning towards me, drawn by the same invisible current that was pulling at me. My eyes dropped to his mouth, then back to his eyes. The question was there, hanging in the air, a terrifying, beautiful, world-altering question. Is this happening? Is this real? He started to speak, then stopped. He shook his head slightly, as if arguing with himself. Then, with a slowness that was agonizing, he began to lean across the small wooden table. He wasn't rushing. He was giving me every possible second to pull away, to protest, to break the spell. My entire body was screaming at me to run. This was Mark's father. This was a mistake. This was a fantasy I had let grow out of control. But I didn't move. I couldn't. I was pinned by his gaze, by the raw honesty in his eyes. I was drowning in the hope that what I saw there was real. His calloused hand came up, not to touch me, but to brace himself on the table. He was so close now, I could see the flecks of silver in his blue eyes, smell the faint scent of sawdust, and rain on his skin. He paused, his lips just an inch from mine. It was the final question, the final chance to retreat. I closed the last inch myself. The first touch of his lips was hesitant. It was soft, questioning. It wasn't a kiss of passion, but of discovery. It tasted of coffee and rain and a loneliness so profound it mirrored my own. I felt a shudder go through his entire body, or maybe it was mine. His other hand came up gently and cupped the side of my neck, his thumb stroking the sensitive skin just below my ear. The simple touch sent a shock wave through my system. I let out a breath I didn't know I'd been holding, and the kiss deepened. It was still slow, still achingly tender, but now there was a current of desperate, long-suppressed need beneath it. It was the confession our words couldn't make. It was years of solitude and quiet observation, an impossible longing culminating in this one perfect, terrifying moment. The storm raged outside, but the only storm that mattered now was the one inside me, a whirlwind of fear and relief and a joy so sharp it felt like pain. In the flickering light of a single lantern, surrounded by darkness and the sound of the rain, I was kissing Cole, and nothing in my life would ever be the same. I woke to the unfamiliar sound of birdsong and the sharp, clean scent of pine. For a moment, I was disoriented. The light filtering through the small window of my room was pale and thin. Morning. Then, memory crashed over me like a tidal wave. The storm, the confession, the kiss. My eyes snapped open. A cold dread, immediate and absolute, flooded my veins. My stomach was a churning knot of bees. I lay perfectly still on the narrow cot, listening. The cabin was silent. Too silent. The rain had stopped. There was no sound from the main room, no clink of a coffee mug, no creak of floorboards. Was he gone? Had he left? Oh God, what did I do? The thought was a frantic scream in my head. It was a mistake. A huge, catastrophic mistake. He was grieving. He was vulnerable. The storm had unnerved him. I had taken advantage of him. Or worse, I had completely misread everything. The kiss was a momentary aberration, a fluke brought on by darkness and whiskey-laced confessions of loneliness. A terrible, drunken error. And now, in the cold, unforgiving light of day, he regretted it. He must. I squeezed my eyes shut, a hot flush of shame creeping up my neck. I had ruined everything. I had broken the unspoken rules. I had crossed a line that was clearly marked with a dozen different kinds of warning signs. Age, friendship, assumed orientation. He was going to hate me. He was going to be disgusted. He would tell me to pack my things and leave, and I would have to drive my car of shame all the way back to the city, the memory of that kiss branding me. My heart, which had felt so full and alive just hours before, was now a cold, heavy stone in my chest. The beautiful, fragile connection I had felt was just a figment of my overactive imagination, a product of wishful thinking. He was probably out there right now, trying to figure out the least awkward way to fire his son's pathetic, predatory friend. Then I heard it, the sharp, decisive sound of a handsaw biting into wood. It came from outside, near the half-finished deck. He was here. He was working, as if it were just another day. The normalcy of it was somehow worse than the silence. It was a dismissal. It meant that what had happened between us was so insignificant, so meaningless, that it didn't even warrant a change in the morning routine. Sunrise. We start work. The thought was a fresh stab of humiliation. I forced myself out of bed, my limbs feeling heavy and useless. I pulled on my work clothes, the worn jeans and stained t-shirt feeling like a costume for a part one could no longer play. Every movement was slow, deliberate, a delay, tactic against the moment I would have to face him. I replayed the kiss in my mind, searching for some sign that I had been wrong, that it had been one-sided. But I couldn't find one. I remembered the shudder that went through him, the way his thumb had stroked my neck. Those things had felt real. Stop it. You're rewriting it to fit what you want. Be realistic. My internal monologue was a vicious cycle of hope and self-recrimination. I splashed cold water on my face, staring at my reflection in the small, cracked mirror. I looked pale and haunted. The anxiety was a physical presence, a sour taste in the back of my throat. Taking a deep breath, I opened my bedroom door and stepped into the main room. The lantern was gone from the table. A coffee pot was sitting on the hot plate in the corner, half full. A single mug, his mug, was on the counter empty. He had made coffee. He hadn't made any for me. Or he had, and he'd already finished and gone outside, not waiting. It felt like a deliberate act of separation. I poured myself a cup, my hand trembling slightly. The coffee was bitter. I stood by the window, looking out. Cole was there, just as I'd heard. He was bent over a sawhorse, his back to the cabin. His movements were sharp, efficient, almost violent. He was attacking the wood, not working with it. There was a tension in the set of his shoulders that hadn't been there yesterday. He was radiating a closed-off energy that was as palpable as a wall. He hadn't seen me. I could just slip back into my room, pack my bag, write a note, a pathetic, cowardly note, and just leave. It would be easier. It would spare me the inevitable, excruciating conversation. But the thought of running away felt like a betrayal of the man I had been last night, the one who had been calm in the storm, the one who had dared to close that final inch between them. Cowardice was my default setting. For once, I wanted to be brave, even if it meant facing the rejection head-on. I pushed the cabin door open. The hinges creaked loudly in the morning quiet. Cole froze mid-saw, his back still to me. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he straightened up. He set the saw down with careful precision before he turned to face me. His face was a blank mask. His clear blue eyes were guarded, unreadable. There was no trace of the vulnerability, the warmth I had seen last night. It was like a shutter had been slammed down. "Morning," he said, his voice flat, devoid of all emotion. "Morning," I echoed, my voice barely a croak. An agonizing silence stretched between us. The birdsong seemed to mock it with its cheerfulness. He gestured with his chin toward the pile of lumber. "We need to get these boards sanded and sealed before we install them," he said. His tone was all business. The boss speaking to the hired hand. It was a clear message. Last night didn't happen. We are what we were. Nothing has changed. The hope inside me shriveled and died. The anxiety I had been holding at bay crashed over me in a suffocating wave. I was wrong. I was so wrong. I had imagined it all. "Okay," I mumbled, my eyes fixed on the ground. I couldn't look at him. I couldn't bear to see the pity or disgust that was surely hiding behind that blank expression. The day was torture. We worked in a silence that was thick with everything left unsaid. Every time our shoulders brushed while carrying a plank, I flinched. Every time he gave a clipped instruction, it felt like a judgment. The easy, comfortable rhythm we had found was gone, replaced by a stilted, awkward choreography of two strangers who desperately wished they were anywhere else. My former solitude, the peaceful quiet I had cherished before, now felt entirely different. It was no longer a comfort. It was an absence. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was filled with the ghost of his voice confessing his loneliness, the ghost of his hand on my neck. The cabin, once my haven, had become a prison of regret. I spent the afternoon mentally packing my bags, composing the speech I would give him. "I'll leave in the morning. Thank you for the opportunity. Sorry for the misunderstanding." The word felt wholly inadequate. What had happened felt too significant to be a mere misunderstanding. But what else could I call it? By the time the sun began to dip below the tree line, casting long, mournful shadows across the lake, I had made my decision. I couldn't take another day of this. I would tell him tonight. I would leave at first light. He had retreated to the dock, as he often did at the end of the day. I stayed on the porch, watching his solitary silhouette against the deepening orange of the sky. This was it. I had to do it now. I took a shaky breath and walked down the gentle slope of the lawn toward the water's edge. He heard my footsteps on the wooden planks of the dock, but didn't turn around. "Cole," I started, my voice strained. I think it's probably best if I head out tomorrow." He remained still, his back to me. "Okay," he said. The single word was utterly neutral. No surprise. No disappointment. Just flat acceptance. It was the final confirmation I needed. He wanted me gone. Tears pricked at the back of my eyes. I was determined not to cry in front of him. "I just want to say thank you I'm sorry about today." He cut me off, his voice low and rough. He still hadn't turned around. The words hung in the quiet evening air. I was so stunned I couldn't speak. "I was an ass," he continued, his voice tight. "All day. I am sorry." He finally turned, and the look on his face stopped my breath. The blank mask was gone. In its place was an expression of profound exhaustion, regret, and a vulnerability that was even more potent than what I'd seen during the storm. He looked lost. I woke up this morning," he said, struggling with the words, "and I panicked. It's been a long time, Leo. A long time since I felt anything like that." His gaze dropped to the weathered planks of the dock. "I didn't know what to do. I thought you'd regret it. That you'd wake up and think you'd made a mistake with some old man in the middle of nowhere." The relief that washed over me was so powerful it made me dizzy. It was a physical sensation, like a massive weight being lifted from my chest. I could breathe again. "I thought you regretted it," I whispered, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I was sure of it. I thought you were disgusted, that I'd crossed a line. I was going to leave because I couldn't stand the way you were looking at me. Or not looking at me." His eyes, those impossibly blue eyes, met mine. They were filled with a dawning understanding. "God, Leo. No, it wasn't that at all." He took a step closer. "I was scared. Plain and simple. What happened last night, it felt important. And that terrified me." We stood there, just a few feet apart, the last light of the day bleeding from the sky. We had spent the entire day in a silent, agonizing hell of our own making. Each of us convinced the other had retreated, each of us nursing the same wound. The irony was brutal and beautiful. "Me too," I admitted, my voice barely audible. "It terrified me." He closed the remaining distance between us. He didn't reach for me. Not yet. He just stood there, so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "I don't want you to leave," he said, his voice quiet but firm. It wasn't a request. It was a statement. A plea. And then he did something that shattered the last of my fear. He slowly, deliberately reached out and took my hand. It wasn't a fleeting, accidental brush like before. He threaded his fingers through mine, his grip firm, solid, grounding. He held my hand as if it were an anchor. My gaze fell to our joined hands, his, large and calloused, enveloping mine. It felt right. Incredibly, terrifyingly right. He used his other hand to pull something from his pocket. A single small brass key. He pressed it into my free palm. My fingers curled around the cool metal. "It's the spare," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "For the cabin. It's yours, too, if you want it." I looked from the key in my palm to his face. It was a promise, a tangible act of commitment that spoke louder than any poetic declaration could. It wasn't just a key to a building. It was an invitation, an offering. "Stay. This could be your place, too. You belong here." The tears I'd been holding back finally fell hot and silent. They weren't tears of shame or regret, but of overwhelming, bone-deep relief. "I want it," I whispered. A slow smile spread across his face, transforming his rugged features, erasing the lines of weariness and grief. It was the first real smile I had ever seen from him, and it was the most beautiful thing I had ever witnessed. He squeezed my hand, and in that simple, solid pressure, a new chapter of my life began. The recoil was over. The silence was broken, and we were finally on the same side. The days that followed were a revelation. The crushing weight of unspoken things was gone, replaced by a lightness I hadn't realized was possible. We fell into a new rhythm, one defined not by the distance between us, but by the closing of it. Morning started not with the shrill alarm of my phone, but with the soft clink of Cole making coffee. I'd stumble out of my room, and he'd be there, leaning against the counter, a mug waiting for me. He'd watch me as I took the first sip, a small, private smile on his lips. Our shoulders would brush as I reached for the sugar. A simple, domestic choreography that felt more intimate than the kiss itself. Work was different, too. The silence returned, but it was no longer a weapon. It was a comfort, a shared language. We could work for an hour without a word, communicating only with nods and gestures, and yet I felt more connected to him than I had to anyone in my life. Sometimes I'd look up from sanding a floorboard and find him watching me, his gaze warm and steady. He wouldn't look away. He'd just hold my eyes, and in that shared look, whole conversations would pass. The first time I woke up in his bed, the world felt brand new. It had happened naturally, without discussion. After a long day of work, we had shared dinner, then sat on the porch watching the stars come out, our hands laced together. When we finally went inside, he simply let me past my own room and into his. His room was as sparse and functional as the rest of the cabin, but it smelled of him, of sawdust and fresh air and something uniquely, indefinably Cole. I had been nervous, my old anxieties flaring up, but he had just pulled back the covers and held my gaze. "Stay," he'd said, a simple command that was also a profound plea. Waking up was the best part. The morning light was soft, filtered through the tall pines. I was curled on my side, and his arm was thrown possessively over my waist, his hand resting on my hip. He was still asleep, his breathing a slow, deep rumble against my back. The constant, thrumming anxiety that had been my lifelong companion was gone. In its place was a quiet, solid warmth that seemed to emanate from the point where his body met mine. I lay there for a long time, just breathing, memorizing the feeling of his weight, the security of his arm around me. The morning after anxiety that had once crippled me was replaced by a profound sense of peace. This wasn't a mistake. This was home. We talked. We filled in the gaps of our lives, sharing stories late into the night. I told him about my sterile city life, the pressures of my job, the feeling of being perpetually out of sync with the world around me. He told me about his wife, Sarah, not with the raw grief of that first night, but with a gentle, loving nostalgia. He spoke of his pride in Mark and the hollowing loneliness that had consumed him after his son left for college and the house fell silent. "I just got stuck," he confessed one night, his thumb tracing patterns on the back of my hand. "I built this whole life, and then suddenly I was the only one in it. The work helped, but at the end of the day, it's just you and the quiet. And the quiet gets loud after a while." "I know that loud quiet," I said, my voice soft. "I've lived there for a long time." "Not anymore," he said, his grip tightening on my hand. "Neither of us." He was a man of gestures more than words. He showed me his love in the way he'd bring me a cold bottle of water without me having to ask. In the way he'd take the heavier end of a plank we were carrying. In the way his hand would find mine as we sat on the porch, a simple, grounding touch that said everything. One afternoon, my phone rang. It was Mark. My stomach clenched for a second, the old fear surfacing. We hadn't talked about Mark, about how this would work. Cole saw the look on my face. He put his hand on my shoulder, a silent gesture of support, before walking away to give me privacy. "Hey, how's the manual labor?" Mark's voice was cheerful, oblivious. "You haven't been driven crazy by my old man yet." "No, it's been good," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "The air is good. The work is work. Is he working you too hard? He could be a slave driver." I looked over at Cole, who was now standing by the edge of the lake, giving me space, but his posture was protective. "Waiting." "No," I said, a smile touching my lips. "He's a good teacher." We finished the call, and I walked over to him. He didn't ask what Mark had said. He just watched my face. "We'll have to tell him," I said. It wasn't a question. "I know," Cole nodded. "When you're ready." "I think I'm ready now," I said, surprised at my own bravery. The thought of the awkward conversation was still daunting, but the fear of losing this was so much greater. He put his arms around me, pulling me against his solid chest. I leaned my head against his shoulder, breathing in his scent. He held me tightly, his chin resting on the top of my head. It felt like standing in the lee of a mountain, sheltered from the wind. I thought back to the man I was just a few weeks ago, the anxious, solitary person who hid from the world, convinced that connection was a risk not worth taking. My life had been a series of carefully constructed walls, designed to keep me safe, to keep me from getting hurt. I had come to this cabin looking for solitude, a temporary respite from a life that felt increasingly hollow. I had been looking for an escape, but I hadn't escaped. I had run headfirst into the one thing I was most afraid of. I had found a disruption, a plot twist I never saw coming. Cole, this quiet, steady, impossibly gentle man, hadn't just given me a place to stay. He had dismantled my walls, brick by brick, not with force, but with a quiet patience that mirrored the way he worked with wood. He had seen the person I kept hidden, and he had not been scared away. He had stepped closer. He had stayed. He was the plot twist that had finally led me to a truer sense of myself, to a life that felt not hollow, but full. Full of the scent of pine, the warmth of a shared bed, and the solid, grounding weight of his hand in mine. Looking out over the still, steel-colored water of the lake, held securely in his arms, I knew I hadn't come here to find an ending after all. I had come here to find a beginning.